So I'm a sixth generation farmer. We've been on Taylor's Run, or that land, for 180 years, a bit over 180 years, since 1839. So my family have seen a lot of changes. I've got three adult children as of last week, and my wife has stepped up in a big way the last year, managing the farm. So there's just my wife and I, and my youngest daughter is working part-time on the farm. So we do all sorts of things on our farm. It gets a bit confusing sometimes. We basically we love growing stuff. So sheep, cattle, trees. We even grow veggies sometimes when they don't get frosted. So a lot of challenges. So just our story briefly, because I'll try and get on to some of the other stuff surrounding natural capital. Back in the mid-80s, my parents were getting a little bit desperate with the state of their land. So the New England tablelands between the 1940s and the mid-80s lost over 25% of its tree cover. So New England dieback is pretty well researched and published, and so when the Snowy Mountains talk about the dieback that's happening down there, I'm like, wow, we did that ages ago. So yeah, so the New England tablelands, and it's got to a point now too that we've got a generational change where there's people that don't remember what it used to be like. So the early warnings on our farm that things were starting to come a bit unstuck in the 40s, when we had massive floods, huge loads of deadwood, so a lot more trees dying. We were getting erosion gullies starting to form in places and working their way up into the catchment. I was down here in Tamworth not that long ago, thankful for your soil conference. Landcare, local Landcare ran that, and there was a report, research done by Martin Toms, talking about, I think there's been a 19%, Wayne might be able to correct me on the figures here, 19% increase in the drainage lines throughout, this was in the Namoi catchment, back up into the hills. So that means when we're getting floods, the water is getting into a gully a lot sooner. So, but we were seeing that sort of thing, and my grandfather vaguely remembers that sort of occurring on our farm. The erosion banks were working their way up. So from nice grassed riparian zones to eroded banks, basically overstocking, overuse, and so yeah. And then in 1960, my father remembers he was only 10, but my great uncle was an entomologist, came up to the area, and he was working for CSIRO at the time on the pest in the pine trees, the borer wasps, and my grandfather took him out to have a look at the Christmas beetles on the eucalypts, and he said back then, oh, these will be the death of the eucalypts on the New England tablelands, and sure enough, we've seen a lot of deaths from. And if you go out just now, I know I was out just the other day, and a lot of our ukes are just dripping with Christmas beetles. So that was just one of many things in the ecosystem that were out of balance. So things started to change though. As you can see, the tree loss, this was, thankfully we've got aerial photos to show that this really did happen. And then between the mid-80s and now, we're back up to, we went from less than 5% tree cover, which is where a lot of the New England tablelands proper sit still, back up to over 23% tree cover. So we've made quite a bit of progress in that time, but it's taken over 250,000 trees planted, and these figures are actually out of date now with more recent data. We're actually sequestering roughly over 600 tonnes of CO2 a year. That's just based on biomass, so there's no actually soil carbon in that calculation. That's coming from the Farming for the Future research, which I'll talk about later. So yeah, these are just some of the things that we've achieved on the farm in the last 20 years since I've been home. We hold a lot of big events. We had a little field day on our farm back in 1992 with over 6,000 people through the gate. Somebody was talking about the 90s before. That was before the internet. So the only way you could learn about stuff was to go out and see it, or talk to people, or read books. So social capital's also been a big thing. Tree planting isn't simple. Learning and understanding how to get that many trees in the ground and keep them alive through droughts and floods and New England winters has been quite a challenge. So there's been a lot to learn. And as I said, that photo actually up the top's it's from back in 1992 when we had those 6,000 people on the farm. But yeah, there's been all sorts of other support and extension type things over the years that have been really incredibly important to keeping that learning going, and that's again why we're here today. Climate change and forestry, so my big thing's agroforestry, but basically everywhere I've been around the world the last year, everybody's talking about climate change. And that's whether it's affecting them adversely or positively. So, because we forget in Australia that there are some areas that would really like it to be a little bit warmer or get a few more flooding rains and that sort of thing. So, but it is an issue, and it's something that everybody's having to adjust to around the world. So, generally becoming more resilient. Trees, for me, are the low-hanging fruit. They're really easy to see, and a lot of them are already there. So yeah, anyway. Natural capital, that's mainly what I'm here to talk about, because natural capital, I talk a lot about thinking globally and acting locally. Natural capital basically refers to all the natural resources on your farm. It just happens that carbon is the one that's been singled out as the currency that can be traded. But Charles Massey highlighted in his research that ecological literacy is one of the biggest, the most important things in people changing the way that they do things on farm, and I'm pretty sure Mac has experienced that. And farmers are generally pretty good at observing things too, but not always being able to describe what they're seeing or explain what they're seeing. So just the same way that we have to report on our financials every year to the tax department, a lot of us don't enjoy doing that, but we have to do it. And we have to put our financial accounts in order for the government. And I think things are going a similar way to with natural capital accounts. So you will have to know what natural resources you're using or not using on farm and how they're being used. But it turns out, and a lot of the presenters before pointed out all the benefits to measuring carbon and all the efficiencies that can come out of that. So the Farming for the Future project is a research project that started about 7 or 8 years ago. Basically, Sue Ogilvie wanted to try and understand exactly what all these good things that farmers were doing, that individually, whether it was ground cover or riparian restoration or something to do with soil health, what all these things were doing in terms of actually improving farm productivity and efficiency or profitability on farms. Everybody's talking about sustainability. Very few people are measuring it and accounting for it in a holistic way that can be put up there next to our financial accounts. So the Farming for the Future project is about trying to describe natural capital in a way that can be put up there next to your natural capital accounts, and try and understand where sustainability actually sits between full conservation and full production. So until we actually know where that point is, we're not going to know whether it's sustainable or not. So you all know what natural capital is by now, and you all probably know where soil carbon or carbon, biomass carbon, fits into this picture. But basically there's inflows and outflows, and there's benefits for and against the environment and for and against your business. I was going to run a Slido, but I didn't have much time. But this is a Slido that's been run at probably over 100 different events now, asking what motivates landholders to learn about natural capital. And this is often what the result is. So I would say, yeah, well, obviously it's the largest, most common result. Resilience is really important, and that's one of the big things that that my Nuffield sponsor is most interested in. The Future Drought Fund is building resilience in farmers. So, and it just happens agroforestry is a big part of that. So, landholder motivations, ranking the following: the potential benefits of natural capital, and increased productivity. Drought resilience, as you can see, again, is right up there. So the direct effects of on-farm performance, and then natural capital in commodity markets, and we've all been learning a little bit about that again today, and then access to some of those markets. And again, talking about that sweet spot in between maximised conservation and maximised production, and where you're going to get the most productivity. And so it's a very complicated thing to model, and it is, the Farming for the Future project is just a research project. So if you're wondering where the monetisation of it is, it's not that sort of a project. I'm sure there will be components of it that can be leveraged that way, but generally the idea is that it will give farmers levers to pull, that they can improve their productivity and efficiency of what they're doing on farm already, and in turn it helps profitability, and it also potentially leaves you with excess carbon to trade maybe, or use as offset or an inset. So again, learning how to read the metrics is a big part of the project. It's taken even myself a while to get my head around how some of these work, but the integrity behind the research is probably what's kept me most interested in it. And the results aren't always what people might want or might need, but the research is scoring your farm on ecosystem metrics that are recognisable anywhere in the world. So they're not ecosystem metrics that are just relevant to your region or to Australia. They're ecosystem metrics that could be taken anywhere in the world and talked about. So forage condition, soil condition, proximity, so distance from woody vegetation, connectivity between that woody vegetation, similar to the aggregates in the soil. It's important to the way the woody vegetation above the ground is formed as well. Aquatic condition, so the condition of your water, and ecological condition, which is more to do with biodiversity. And as one part of the project, there is actually a carbon balance. So again, here's your scope 1. This is off our farm, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and then our woody vegetation sequestration, and then our net, including and excluding scope 3. So as you can see, you're going, well, where's the soil carbon? So as it turns out, measuring soil carbon, as you've heard, requires a hell of a lot of soil testing. One of the aims of this project is to create something that is very cheap to model the natural capital across farms, and something that's a little bit more accessible and doesn't require as much ground truthing. So they're using a hell of a lot of aerial information, LiDAR information, that sort of thing, NVDI photos, and but for the research they are doing quite a bit of ground truthing to ensure that the integrity is there, until the linkages are much clearer. So they are constantly trialling new technologies, and I'll show you some maps from those. So Some of these were created using various different applications. So there's that proximity, distance between trees, and then the connectivity. So for me, I can start to plan where I should be creating connections for improved ecological condition across the farm. Aggregation, and then I find two of the more interesting maps that have been produced are the ones on the right here, winter shelter and summer shelter. So they're actually maps that have modelled the shelter that I get from topography and woody vegetation during winter, so my cold southwesterly winds, and then again during summer the hot northwesterly winds. So, and they're out of a software application called Downforce. So yeah, there's a whole lot of things coming out of this, and it is super complicated, but it is going a long way. And having been at a couple of international events, including COP28 last year, I saw no one, no organisation, no individuals that were doing this sort of research on this sort of scale. So it's really exciting. At the moment, they're up to 130 landholders, mostly across Eastern Australia, some in Western Australia, but they're hoping to push that out to 1,200 farms across the country, which would make the results very, very significant, statistically significant. So at this stage, these are some of the really positive relationships. So ecological condition, you can see again, as ecological condition goes up, productivity goes up, but there's a point too when ecological condition continues to go up and productivity actually goes down. So I think it's important to remember something. Ground cover, this is actually the results are a little bit different between some of the different mixes on farms. So some farms have a bigger mix of improved pastures, and some farms have a bigger mix of native only and more vegetation. So some of these do vary a little bit, but as you can see, ground cover too also continues to go up. Productivity goes up as ground cover goes up. But I think on some of the farms, productivity does actually go down a little bit once you get over a certain ground cover point. So when you start to reduce solar radiation on your green growing grasses. So some of the changes observed are not predicted on our farm. When my parents first started planting, it was all about just shade and shelter for the animals. But as we started to fence up different areas of the property, our pasture management started to change. We started to see there was aspects of the animal welfare and health standards that were improving and that were giving us access into other markets. Just the mental well-being, just through the 2019 drought, to be able to come back to a farm, be out of the wind, actually have ground cover, was pretty amazing when a lot of the region was looking quite apocalyptic. So, and then tourism and aesthetics was something that my parents actually never thought about when they first started planting trees. We've planted a lot of exotics on our farm as well. So we're also starting to manage, now that we've got our tree cover back up to a certain point, we're now starting to manage regeneration as well, which is really exciting, but we're not limited on, so there's been a lot more research done on ecosystem function and recognition of that ecosystem function in some of our mixed exotic and native areas. So that's been something that's come out of it as well, because a lot of the early species we put in were just for shade and shelter, and they were potentially timber species. So there was a lot of radiata pine, which are considered weeds in some areas. It's not just about ground cover, but also tree cover. We talk a lot about ground cover, but tree cover, again, during the extreme periods, like during the drought, being able to drop the wind speed just a few kilometres an hour made a huge difference to keeping the soil on the ground and reducing evapotranspiration. So yeah, we forget that how important that is as well. Financial capital, I don't think I need to talk much about this. I'm usually talking to people that don't always understand that farmers are business managers, not just farmers. But there's a lot of aspects to the agroforestry enterprise that we've now got, that it's built a lot of resilience into our business. So I think we'll all remember when the sheep prices dropped to incredible low levels not that long ago. It just happened that timber prices went through the roof. So I was able to wind back my sheep enterprise for a little while and jump on the sawmill, and we made quite a bit of money during that period. So I don't know what we're going to do about the wool market though. Grazing integration, this is something too that has been, I guess, just occurred organically over the years, but when we started closing up areas, we never planned to take them offline completely. So there's always been an establishment period, but pretty much all our forests, and even some of the denser ones, you can see there's pasture in there. In the middle of winter, again, in the middle of the dry periods, we often will have green growing grass in those forested areas. They're open forests, they're not dense forests. So we manage those forests again to encourage grass growth. One of the things we've learnt over the years, and probably were a little bit aware of for a start, was that any timber trees we were putting in, because we're at such a small scale, aiming for the highest quality timber was really important. So, and it's again something I've seen across a lot of small businesses travelling around the world. If you're quite small, you can do quality much better than a lot of big businesses can. So this is actually a photo from Argentina. They get about 2 metres of rain a year, but they've increased their cattle production, their beef production by 20%, and by thinning the trees to a certain level, they've pushed their harvest period from 20 years out to 40 years. But by doing that, they're getting a much higher value product. So that seems a little bit crazy, like 40 years, that's, I won't be around that long. But a lot of these multi-generational farms are looking well ahead. So my Nuffield topic, as Lana said, is looking at the barriers to agroforestry in grazing and cropping areas specifically. Generally, agroforestry is much better understood in areas where there's a lot of forestry already. I'm still going. This report won't come out until July next year, so there's a lot for me to process. But these were just some of the things. Myths and misconceptions was a classic. Constantly integrating trees into grazing and cropping enterprises. Yes, you can plant trees in a straight line, so you can run your crop in a straight line, things like this. Trees, sheep and cattle can actually walk under trees too. It's quite incredible. These are the few of the economics, getting your head around the economics. I won't go into the details, I can share this all after, but this was a recent clear fell we did on our place. 47% of the volume came back for just 1% of the value. And that's because these were older plantings that we hadn't done the thinning or the management on to improve the timber. But we still, gross income on these older plantings that weren't managed well was still between 150 and 220 per year. So there's money to be made. This one's since 1988. The carbon growing on our farm. So everybody's been talking about carbon. There was a carbon study done on our farm back in 1992 at Southern Cross University. It's before carbon was ever considered a commodity. But we've been farming carbon forever. It's in the wool, it's in the meat, and it's in the timber. So don't think that you're not already doing it. again, these are some of the barriers that have come up while I've been thinking about what the barriers are. So defining the definition of agroforestry, I won't go into that too much, but basically woody vegetation on your land, whether you're growing it, regenerating it, or planting it. And whether it's for fruit or for fibre or for shelter, so, or even just aesthetics. Land tenure is a really big one, whether you're leasing land or trying to buy land or pay off land or whatever. Yeah, and the risk management, that's a really big one. So because this is a 15, 20 year project planting woody vegetation, so there's a hell of a lot can change in that time. So anything you can do to reduce risk management is important. I better stop there.